and we give her late notice late notice that we couldn't meet. And the board met real quickly via email, and we decided it was probably all those things happening. It was probably just best to unfortunately go virtual on this. All right, we'll officially begin the meeting now. So Rotary motto.
Service above self.
Self.
And why don't we go ahead and stand?
Here.
Pledge of allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag
Of the
United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all.
Okay, and sort of a confluence of all the bad things that could happen seemed to happen this weekend with the power outage, the storms. We've got people that have been sitting on I-95 from Central State, Virginia, all the way up to DC overnight in a snowstorm with no food, no water. We've got people all over the country still trying to get home for the holidays, and are trapped in airports. Here we've had the electrical outages, so it's just a lot of bad things going on right now. Hopefully we get them all over with and we're done with it. Of course, the whole COVID situation too. So for all that, why don't we have a moment of silence and think about the people that are going through all these trials and tribulations.
Got it. I got it.
Okay, thank you, everyone. And as a reminder, Bill does have us recording this meeting. Hi, Paul.
Hello.
All right, why don't we start out with Paul, since he's joined us, and give us some news on COVID.
Okay, there was a combination really of bad news and good news. The bad news is that COVID, as most of you know, anybody's watching the news knows that it's pretty much exploded nationwide, and particularly in Virginia. We've set all-time records for new numbers of cases in a week. And it just continues to skyrocket the rate of it. It's mostly probably the Omicron variant. I haven't seen hard numbers on this, but the CDC has sort of revised its estimate as to how much of this is Delta versus Omicron. They first thought Omicron was the vast majority, and now they've said, well, Delta's probably 45% of it or something like that. And so that's probably the case in Virginia as well. A week ago, the cases had already soared up in North Virginia in the metropolitan area of DC, and now that's extended to the rest of the state. In Virginia, as of Friday, the rate had gone up to 800 new cases per 100,000 people. Which is by far the most we've ever had in Virginia. I checked the numbers this morning, and the rate in the past 7 days, this has changed in 4 days now from Friday's numbers. The rate is now well over 1,000 cases per 100,000 people. So it's what that means is that for every 100 people that live in Virginia, more than one of those has gotten a new case of COVID in the past week. So, I mean, that's just an unbelievable epidemic. The Omicron variant is felt now to be the second most contagious virus known to the world, second only to measles. And as most of y'all know, if your kid gets measles, any other kid that's in the same room with them gets measles. Omicron is the second only to that. So in Virginia Beach, the number was up to 85 cases per 100. I'm sorry, 850 cases per 100,000 people last week. And we've had about the same number of new cases in the past 4 days as we had in the 7 days ending last Friday. And on the Eastern Shore, it's just skyrocketed again. Northampton County had 39 new cases in the previous week ending Friday, but since then, there's been 72 new cases reported in Northampton County just in the past 4 days. Cape Charles had 15 new cases and as of Friday in the past week, and just in the past 4 days, there's been 21. We've never had more than 15 cases in 1 week ever in Cape Charles, and we've had 21 in the past 4 days. So it's good that we're not meeting in person. I doubt that we will want to meet in person until this begins to go down. I expect it to continue to go up even further. Okay, but to the good news. The good news is that there's two pieces of it. One is that Omicron is clearly a less severe disease than what's been caused by the previous COVID variants. That was strongly suspected a week or two ago, and now it's pretty much been proven. And there's actually some interesting animal studies that show they've infected a lot of mice and rats with COVID and of the various variants. And Omicron variant tends to infect primarily the upper respiratory tract, and whereas the other variants affect primarily the lungs. So just like the common cold, which coronavirus is, of course, the main cause of the common cold, actually, and the COVID is just some mutations from it's in the coronavirus class. So, but the lungs are primarily spared from Omicron, and as opposed to the other variants, and so that's why people are not dying from Omicron and at the same rate. Although hospital emergency rooms are still being flooded with Omicron patients. You can get severely ill from it, and there have been deaths, and so it's not a benign disease, but it's not as serious as the other variants. The other piece of good news is if you look at the curves in South Africa, where this was first reported, there was a huge steep increase lasting slightly less than a month. It reached its peak on December 17th, and now it's on its way down. So the main surge lasted slightly less than a month, and so now the number of cases, new number of cases per day, is less than half what it was at the peak. So if the rest of the world is kind of like South Africa, in particular the United States, this thing will peak by late January and should be way down by late February. What's good about that is that this thing is so contagious that a huge number of people in the world will be affected with Omicron. The death rate won't be as high as it would have been from the other variants. Be much lower. And oh, by the way, I meant to mention, if you look at the curves of deaths in Africa, there's 4 surges of cases, and the first 3 surges had big surges in deaths deaths associated with it. And this surge of Omicron, of the Omicron variant, is higher than the other surges, but the death rate so far has been only a slight little bump. And so that also tends to confirm that Omicron is a causes less severe disease. So the hopeful scenario is that the world will get some herd immunity from the Omicron variant, which will help protect us against other variants in the future. And this will become an endemic disease like flu that with widespread vaccination, we can just live with like we live with the flu. Any questions?
Well, what's the correlation with the rise in the positive test rate? What's the correlation to the number of tests that are actually being recorded? It seems like the test quantity must be way up, given the fact you can't find a test, which would result in the reported cases higher. Maybe the cases have already been much higher than we think in the past because there wasn't as much testing going on, and people were walking around with Omicron, and it was unreported. So what's
well, I suspect that we've always had underreporting because there's probably been a lot of asymptomatic cases that were never detected, and mild cases that people just never bothered to get tested for. And the same is true now, and probably even more so because it's very difficult to get a test. So I expect there's a lot of people right now that just think they've got a cold. I've got a friend that told me they had a cold. I said, well, where'd you get the cold? And how do you know it's not Omicron? Well, it's not bad enough to go to the doctor and get tested, and you can't find a test to do it. So I bet you there's a lot of people walking around with Omicron that aren't getting tested and that aren't being reported. So it's probably even more extensive than we know.
Oh, I think the thing that's confusing to me the most is the whole thing about natural immunity. Once you do contract COVID, whatever variant it is, there's been a battle going on. Well, we're not going to count people with natural immunity. And my understanding, they are not part of the count when they say this many people are either fully vaccinated and or naturally immune. They won't count those naturally immune towards herd immunity. So, for example, I think right now we're like 62% fully vaccinated people, and they say herd immunity is between 60 and 70%. And they say that so many percentage of people have had COVID, but they're not counting them as naturally immune. Am I confused by all this? And I feel like I am.
Well, several issues you brought up, really. The first is the question of if you've had COVID, are you naturally immune? And the answer to that is no. It's having a case of COVID, in my mind, is sort of similar to having had one vaccine dose. And one vaccine dose doesn't give you immunity. Even 2 vaccine doses and even 3 vaccine doses don't give you total immunity. And in fact, the first person that died in the United States from Omicron that was documented had COVID before.
Right.
And now that person had some underlying conditions, but still it's clear that having had COVID in the past didn't protect you against the Delta variant, and it certainly doesn't protect you against the Omicron variant. So that's why the recommendation is that even if you've had COVID before, you should get vaccinated. And if you get vaccinated, if you have had COVID before, you are a little less likely to get COVID again than somebody who's never had it and never had a vaccine. But if you get vaccinated, you're much more protected. Now, the second issue is what constitutes herd immunity now. And the way herd immunity works is the more contagious a virus is, the higher the vaccination rate has to be to achieve herd immunity. So when they were saying, you know, a year ago that if we can get up to 70%, 75% of our population vaccinated, we'll have herd immunity. Well, that was with the original variant, which was much less contagious than what we have now. So with Omicron being almost as contagious as measles, the number needed for herd immunity would probably be 95% or something like that. So people aren't counting previous cases of COVID as part of that, because it just gets too complex to do that. And those people really aren't as protected as the vaccinated people.
Well, I guess to add to that, I know there are people that have had both vaccines and had the booster and caught COVID, and
Yeah.
they aren't counted as naturally immune. So they're fully vaccinated and have boosters, but we're told
nobody is
they're not
100%.
immune.
Nobody is 100% immune. It doesn't matter how many vaccinations you get. You're not 100% immune, but you're much more immune if you've had 3 vaccinations than you are. You're much more resistant to getting an infection, I should say. You're not immune. Nobody's immune. But the more vaccinations you get, if you've had the booster, you're much more protected than if you've had just 2 shots, and that's much more protected than if you've had 1 or none. And even if you get it, of course, you're also much more protected against getting severe disease.
Okay, I guess it would just make sense to me then to drop the whole term herd immunity, because you're never going to be immune.
Well, it's a useful term, and if we had 95% of the population vaccinated, I don't think we'd be dealing with any more serious infections.
Okay, and I guess
Probably wouldn't have had Omicron sweeping the country.
I guess the last thing I'll mention is COVID has been around since, I think, the early 1960s.
That's not true.
It's not?
COVID-19 was discovered in 2019. That's how it got its name. There's
Right.
never been a known case prior to 2019.
Right, but COVID, not COVID-19.
Well, coronavirus has been around forever,
Right,
but it's common. It's causes the common cold.
right. Okay, anybody else with questions or comments? Okay.
Listen, I have, Paul, would you just briefly tell us what is the best practices we should be observing on a daily basis?
Sure. On a daily basis, you should, right now, I mean, this thing is so widespread that I think you should isolate as much as possible. If you have to go to a public place, which we all do to get groceries and stuff, then you should wear a mask. And a cloth mask, by the way, is not felt to be that protective because it doesn't fit tightly enough around your nose. So you should wear a mask that has a metal little insert in it, like surgical masks do, that you can mold around your nose, so that it's less likely for particles to get in under the mask. So I've heard the recommendation that if you wear a surgical mask, one of those a cloth surgical mask with a metal insert that you can mold around your nose, and then put a cloth mask over that, that's probably but more protective than either one alone. And so when I go to a crowded public place, I double mask. And I think, you should avoid public areas, certainly and if you are in one, if you have to go to one, at least wear a surgical mask or an N95 mask if you can get one, or a double mask.
Okay.
I mean, the other obvious things are, wash your hands and this thing is spread by particles in the air, not free virus particles, but particles on little bits of sputum that are in the air.
Paul.
Yeah.
Could you speak on the difference between asymptomatic and pre-symptomatic?
Pre-symptomatic, I'm not, I don't know that there's a big practical difference. I mean, I suppose if somebody has COVID, they could be pre-symptomatic and then later get symptomatic. Asymptomatic means you've just had an infection that you never really had symptoms from. But
you can still pass it to someone. You can still pass the virus to someone else if you're asymptomatic. Oh, he's frozen?
Everybody's frozen.
Everybody's frozen.
No, I'm not frozen.
yeah,
Yes,
He's still frozen. All of them.
I'm not.
You and I are on the same.
Yeah, but they can't. We can't hear.